Welcome to the GenXplainers podcast. Today, we'll be discussing and ranking the studio albums of the B-52s. You've definitely heard their hits, but have you heard their deeper cuts? Where should you start? Well, let us explain. In this first part of a two-part episode, we'll be discussing the history and the albums. Right now, I'd like to introduce, over on the other couch, here's Alan.
Hello.
And over on the couch with me, snuggling up, is Mike.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about the B-52s, American band, formed in Athens, GA, that's Georgia, in 1976. First album was self-titled. The B-52s came out in 1979. It had the huge breakout hit Rock Lobster.
Someone reached in and grabbed it. Was a rock lobster.
And Planet Claire was on there. Let me ask you guys, what do you remember about this album?
I remember that it sounded like nothing I'd heard before.
Coming out of 70s radio rock, or radio,
Yeah, Led Zeppelin and...
It's funny. I just a few years ago, I had never knew this before, that they were influenced by Yoko Ono.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes,
there was a big article that John Lennon heard, I think, Rock Lobster in a club, and then said they have Yoko sound, like that kind of thing, and they went and told her, and then they got interested in them and all that stuff, and actually I found out later on the B-52s said that Yoko Ono was a big influence on what their music was.
And he just called me one day and said, "Listen to this, Yoko." And he couldn't believe that he listened to B-52 Rock Lobster. And he just thought that was great, And he said, "Well, your time is coming, Now you can do your thing," or something like that.
When we read that, we all screamed. All of us just went, "Ah!"
And you guys made John very happy. I mean, and it was that last year for him, we didn't know that. Mm-hmm. But it was really great that he found out about you guys then, I really appreciated that,
And listening to the B-52s inspired John Lennon to start making music again.
Yeah.
That's where, that was the impetus for Double Fantasy, which obviously doesn't sound anything like a B-52s album.
Right, but they got him back in, and
He got
became
excited.
a huge album.
Yeah, he got excited about doing music again.
Yeah. Yoko influenced them, and they influenced John Lennon.
John Lennon, yeah.
He should have just cut out the middleman, and John Lennon should have just listened to his wife.
That would have been quicker. Yeah, and my memory of it is, I hadn't really heard anything like it before, but it was just completely infectious and fun. Rock Lobster was like, what? He's singing about, and which was this weird guy going, But it was just a lot of fun, and that was my first sort of feeling about it. And then a year later, they came out with an album called Wild Planet, which was very much a continuation of the first album. Private Idaho, big hit off of that. When that album came out in 80, I'm not even sure when I first heard B-52s. I'm thinking it's around Wild Planet.
I didn't hear them until probably freshman year of high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was a little bit later for me. Or at least I may have heard them, but I didn't really know who they were, I should say. Prior to that, I was like Devo and all kinds of stuff like that.
Which I put them very much together, Devo and B-52s, is sort of this amazing kind of late 70s movement of people doing stuff that completely new kind of thing and just doing what they want to do,
Yeah, but I didn't until I learned about the Quake, the station. I didn't learn about that till later on.
Local quote modern rock radio station from where we grew up.
Yeah, and so that's why I until I started listening to that, I didn't really know a lot of that music until really probably last year of middle school, first year of high school, and that's when I really started getting into that stuff. So
yeah, I had the older brothers who were sort of tapped into music, and I think probably my brother Tony probably had one of these albums, and I was like, what is that? I like it.
Yeah, when I would stay with my dad, he was living with another family because of the mudslides. He lost his house, and they had a high school. Actually, I think he was off to college, so he had this little stash of records in the room that I slept in when I was visiting, and it had a lot of stuff that I just wouldn't hear on the radio. And that was probably my first exposure to like Oingo Boingo and Devo and the B-52s.
Yeah, unfortunately, my family did not listen to this stuff. So
you had to hear it on the radio.
They were Osmonds, Glenn Campbell, Pat Boone. So.
Sure. Not a lot.
I could talk about Glenn Campbell.
Well, we might.
And we're gonna do our Osmond show.
Of course. So the next recording they did was actually an EP. It was supposed to be an album, but along the way it turned into an EP for different reasons. It's called Mesopotamia. It came out in '82. Interesting note: it was produced by David Byrne of Talking Heads, and I think you can hear his influence a little bit in there. But I think creatively they wanted to go a different way. In retrospect, it seems clear they wanted to do something a little different. But and I remember when Mesopotamia came out. So obviously I was already listening to them or heard them because I think I had it on cassette or something. And I remember listening to it and going, "Oh, this isn't as good as their other stuff." At the time, I was saying that, and, just because it was different and everything different was like, what? Do you remember? Hearing Mesopotamia, and what were your thoughts?
I remember listening. I think I was actually with you when I first heard it, because I hadn't heard it. I never had that one album. I had the other two albums, and then then Whammy, but I didn't have Mesopotamia, and so I didn't hear it until through you, I think. So that's the first time I heard it, and I remember thinking it's kind of forgettable. And that was my first impression of it, just flat out first impression.
I think in retrospect, I think I like it a lot more now. Just to note that.
Well, yeah, now is different. Yeah, I think you even said it not too long ago how you're more accepting or forgiving of sounds than you used to be, and I think I've gotten that way too over the years.
I just want to point out that you have a policy about forgiving sounds. That's weird.
It depends on how much they wronged me.
For the longest time, so Mesopotamia is 6 tracks, and for the longest time, and when I say the longest time, I mean decades, I thought it was 4 tracks because I recorded the songs I liked from it on a tape.
Nice.
How funny.
And I would just listen to it. And it's a much stronger record when you take out the parts you don't like.
Yeah.
So I had like a very positive association with it.
So you don't so much forgive sound as just eradicate it.
Oh, I forget.
You forget. That's right. Better to forget. I think David Byrne's influence, he was sort of pushing them a certain way as the producer. And I think that direction and what came out of it, I didn't dig at all at the time. Because, you're young. So with the direction they did go in was less guitar, no surf really, maybe a little, but that influence kind of went away and they went more electronic keyboard, drum machine, which was what was happening kind of. Probably they heard this kind of stuff and got excited about it or were into it. They came out with, in 1983, Whammy, with an exclamation point. And this one was they had some pretty big hits on this one. Legal Tender. Mm-hmm. And Song for a Future Generation, which we'll talk about. I enjoy that song. So yeah, you may even remember when Whammy came out, maybe not.
I don't remember specifically listening to that when it first came out. I remember listening to it a lot later on. But yeah, I know I did get into it, and I agree with you. Legal Tender was a great song. That's probably the first song I heard from it. Was on because I played that one on the radio.
Single.
We're in the basement, learning to print all of it's hot. 10, 20, 30 million ready to be spent. We're stacking them against the wall, those gangster presidents.
I remember liking about half the album and then not liking the other half, and so. But again, re-listening to it years later, I feel different about it. So it's like I'm just talking about my first impressions back then.
Right.
Like I didn't like "Work That Bird" back then, but now I actually like that song.
Or Big Bird.
Is it Big Bird?
Big
there's
Bird.
Work That
Work That Skirt. Work That Skirt.
And there's Big Bird. And actually, I was listening to Big Bird actually recently, not just for the research for the show, but I was in the car and it came on, and I'm like, oh, this is one I don't like so much. And then I listened to the whole thing again, and I'm like, actually, this is kind of fun. Whatever. I'm forgiving it for being what it is.
I pinch myself. I think I'm dreaming. I'm not. I hear screaming.
I'm glad that you're taking this more balanced and accepting approach to sound.
At a certain point, you got to let go.
It's true. I think that Song for a Future Generation was the first video I saw by them. I had seen them perform like on Saturday Night Live, like reruns, watching that stuff, but I think it was the first time I saw a video from them. That's one of the memories I have of first experiencing this record.
Wanna be the empress of fashion.
Wanna be the president of Moscow. Let's meet and have a baby now.
And yeah, it's a totally different direction for them. I think until then, I always associated them with that kind of surf sound. But yeah, this is completely different. And my understanding is that Keith Strickland, the drummer, didn't want to play drums anymore, and so that's why they switched to the drum machines. And that probably changed the sound a lot.
Yeah, and he went to keyboards mostly, and later it'll become important. He did guitar too. I believe he picked that up, or at least he eventually did.
It's not a mystery.
Shh. Don't ruin it.
We're telling a story.
I would say though that they were well known in their early albums in a lot of clubs, and so that could have also influenced their sound too if they were hanging out at clubs.
They, as a band, were very sort of influential and important to the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
And perhaps going, maybe that was the culture of that dance culture. Maybe played into it. They've always been important in that community, which was great. I mean, especially at the time, where didn't have much representation.
And that they actually from a lot of their concerts they give a lot of money to organizations too.
Yes, they supported GLAAD and other organizations back when it wasn't as common. That's the word. So that was 83's Whammy, and then there was a long break here. In 86 they came out with their next album, Bouncing Off the Satellites. Now we start seeing more songs just from written by one member. For instance, I think the song Juicy Jungle was a Fred Schneider song, and what is it, Housework was Cindy Wilson's song? Or Kate Pearson's song, sorry. But the other thing that sort of happened as they were finishing the album was Ricky Wilson passed away from AIDS-related reasons. I mean, from AIDS, basically. Yeah. And it delayed the release a little bit, but they finished it. So it came out a little bit later than they expected, and the sound of it was very different. I think the songwriting is a little more in depth in subject matter. Let's say. I mean, like Juicy Jungle was an environmental song. You know, it just like compared to the first album or first two albums, you know, the songs were about something, and I think it's just the maturity of songwriting that was happening.
When that album came out, since I'm going back to the first impressions thing, I was all over this album. I loved this album when it first came out. It's not my favorite of theirs, but it is something that I really, really liked a lot.
So, Al, what about Bouncing Off the Satellites?
So this is the first B-52s record that I remember being excited about it coming out, because I was a fan by then.
Right.
And I, remember buying it and putting it on the record player and listening to it. I don't have as concrete a memory of the previous albums. And I feel like this is a more disjointed album in a way, not necessarily in a bad way, but it feels less like it's less group and more individual, as you were saying earlier. But still a record I love very much.
Yeah, good one. So after the tragic death of Ricky Wilson, they took some time off. It wasn't another 3 years, in '89, that they came out with their next album, Cosmic Thing. Their biggest album with their biggest hits, and they really blew up after that. Just in the mainstream, especially one song, which you all know, Love Shack. And if you've ever been to a wedding, particularly, you've heard that song. But yeah, that was their biggest hit to date, and up to that point. Other songs, Rome was pretty big. Yeah, Cosmic Thing. And in '89, well, we were in college, so were we waiting for B-52's albums at this point? What was happening? I think when you go to college, you start listening to a broader spectrum.
I don't think we were waiting for albums, but when it came out, I was actually pretty excited because I did think it was a very strong album.
I remember being surprised, actually, about how good I thought it was, because there had been such a long hiatus, and Ricky Wilson had died, and he was the guitarist. And even though Bouncing Off the Satellites and Whammy were not so guitar driven, I just always associated that kind of surf sound with the B-52s, and so I thought it would make a big difference, and I think it did and still does. But yeah, that album was huge, and you couldn't get away from it. And I was happy for the B-52s.
Yeah, it's good to see them get major mainstream success, having liked them for so long. I don't think I mentioned my take on Cosmic Thing. I think, like I mentioned, I think there was a lot of different music that I was getting into, so I didn't run out and buy the album. You didn't need to, because you really heard a lot of it on the radio.
Yeah.
But I liked the songs. I mean, undeniably good songs. And again, I think I share that feeling of, I'm glad they're having so much success, because they're great. I love them, so.
Yeah, even a song like Love Shack, which you've heard hundreds of times, I never really got tired of it. In other words, if it's on, I'm okay listening to it. Mm-hmm. A lot of songs I don't feel that way about, and I've heard so many times.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm at the point of changing the station or skipping it, hitting skip when it comes on necessarily, but I guess it depends on my mood.
Yeah,
I mean, we've heard it a lot.
Yeah, I know, but again, it's like not something that I am. I don't have a dislike of listening to it.
Okay.
When it's on.
Roam if you want to, roam around the world. Roam if you want to, without anything but the love we feel.
So yeah, huge album. So as their follow-up, 3 years later, so they took some time. 1992, Good Stuff came out. Now, something about this one, Cindy was not on this album.
Nope.
I think she, for personal reasons, decided not to participate. And I think it's noticeable, because one of the things I love about B-52s is the harmony interplay between Kate and Cindy. It's just awesome, and that I was missing that. Love Kate too, but something missing there, and also the songs. Well, I just don't feel it. It's not very good. It's not as good. Just not even just from their last album, just generally speaking. And maybe they were playing it safe and trying to do an album that felt like a follow-up to Cosmic Thing. Maybe the production techniques they tried to recreate or something, but there was something about it that feels flat to me. What do you guys think about good stuff?
Hot Pants Explosion.
Yeah, you feel like you had Hot Pants Explosion.
Okay, so Hot Pants Explosion is not an opinion, though.
I know.
It's
No.
a side effect.
Okay, the first time I heard the album, I didn't want to listen to it ever again.
Wow. Yeah.
Just flat out didn't want to. And then because of this recording, you made me. So
I made you.
no,
Or else.
I there's 2 songs on it that I could listen to, and that's kind of how I feel going forward with the album. It's like if I hear those 2 songs, fine. If I don't, I'm okay too. It's just I base the quality of the album whether or not I want to listen to it again.
Sure.
And at the time, didn't even care if I ever heard it again. And that's just how I felt about the album. And granted, like I said, like you were saying about Cosmic Thing, it's like I'm so happy for their success and happy that they had this big thing, but then that follow-up was just so difficult for me, especially having
Right.
been a fan. I even felt that they didn't really utilize Fred that well on it. A lot of their sound comes from the way he does a lot.
That's a good point. I'd forgotten. I had noticed that when I listened to it again, that Fred started singing
Yeah.
rather than sort of what he did before, and that's fine. If Fred wants to sing, he can sing. But it again, all these factors I think take away from the uniqueness of the band in a way.
Yeah.
It felt very, I don't know if safe is the word, but it felt just not very unique compared to what they'd put out before. Maybe.
I have a tough time with this record because, and I'm just going to preface what I'm about to say by saying it is a million times easier to criticize something than it is to make something, and I understand that. But I'm like mad at this record.
Al, you need to forgive the song.
No, that's your place. I don't have to forgive anything. But first of all, I never listened to it except to do this podcast. I'd heard, I think Good Stuff was like the first single, and maybe Tell It Like a T.I. Is, because I think I vaguely remember hearing that song, or maybe someone was just playing it sometime. But I never listened to it. And I listened to it for this, and I couldn't listen to it all at once. Like, I had to break it up, because I just was like, oh my God, it's so boring. Like, a B-52s album shouldn't be boring.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a whole theory that even from the very first record, you have a lot of really iconic and interesting and different songs, and you're like, what are they even writing a song about? But you also have a mix of conventional type songs that are just, you hear it through the B-52s kind of prism. And that continues throughout, but starting with Cosmic Thing and then continuing through, I think the songs get more and more conventional, and that is less interesting to me.
Yeah.
And like Vision of a Kiss,
Ugh.
yeah, is to me, it's like, it's not a B-52 song. Anyway, but it is, they made it. Although, to get back to the Cindy Wilson thing, I don't know, if you don't have Ricky Wilson or Cindy Wilson, do you have the B-52s? I mean, you have, I think, the 52Bs or something like that. It's not the same.
Yeah.
I think her presence is missed, and I don't like this record.
Yeah. I have a bit of a consensus on that one. Mm-hmm. So that was, it almost felt like that's their last album, because they didn't put out an album for years and years, and it certainly seemed like, well, that's what they're ending with. But oh no, in 2008, which is how many years is that? 16 years later, they came out with an album called Funplex. I had never listened to it. I kind of probably vaguely knew that they came out with an album, but I was just like, okay, whatever. So for this show, I listened to it, and I was pleasantly surprised, maybe because my last memory was good stuff, but it had an updated sound, but it was still, they brought back some of the fun, I think, and obviously they brought back Cindy, and they had that going on, which is great. And I think Fred was a bit more in his Fred form, perhaps. But I did enjoy this quite a bit, surprisingly.
I'm a pleasure seeker, shopping for a new distraction. I'm a pleasure seeker, looking for some platinum action. I'm a pleasure seeker, moving to the music. I'm a pleasure seeker, looking for the real thing.
Candelabras in a wonder bra.
Oh,
Crestbarn runway, a real draw.
oh,
Faster pussycat, thrill, thrill. I'm at the mall on a diet pill.
oh, broke my heart at the fun flex. Yes, you did, yes, you did. Oh, broke my heart at the fun flex. Yes, you did, yes, you did. The taco
Yeah, I mean, they were back into more of the not traditional form of B-52s, but at least somewhat closer to that. The topics of the songs were more that, the styles was a little bit more that, even though, as I think I mentioned off air, a little bit darker. At times, the sound is darker, a little bit more modern techno-y at times, but still having that B-52s-ish kind of thing. And I think Fred was back in his element.
Yeah, there was some quirk and there was some playfulness along with the sort of modern production and sound stuff.
Yeah, they were singing about the things that their songs originally were about, and why they created the band in the first place. Their love of that campy, trashy kind of nostalgia of those 50s and 60s kind of things, and it works in this. They talked about, they sang about UFOs again. They sang about those old Russ Meyer movies. Like all the different things they do in it, which are what they like doing and what they're best at.
Yeah.
And I think it really brings a lot to it, even though, again, it's not their best album. It's still more closer to their original style or intent of what their group was. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where they were when they put it out at their stage in career and just as people,
Yeah.
this is the kind of album that they're going to put out, and it's a good album. I mean, I'm not expecting them to put out Wild Planet again. I'm not expecting, and I'm also hoping that they don't put out another good stuff or some kind of let's try to do Cosmic thing again. They took the essence of who they are and put it in the framework of with modern production and modern sound. I find it very danceable. I mean, pretty upbeat. Like you said, the themes might be a little darker, but I think it still gets you moving a little bit.
Yeah, I hadn't heard this record. I may not even have known it existed until we were going to do this show. And I listened to it. It was... So I listened to them in order. And after Good Stuff, I was like, oh my God, there's another one. But I think it is better. I think it is interesting in that it sounds... Again, Cosmic Thing, Good Stuff, and Funplex sound more like they belong to the time that they were released in, whereas the previous albums sound ahead of their time. So who knows? I don't know. Maybe the times caught up with the B-52s, or maybe the B-52s were trying to blend in more, or they were influenced more by what was going on.
Right.
But I think it's a better album than Good Stuff, and it's better they go out on that than Good Stuff.
Definitely, yeah.
If it is their last album, it'd be nice to have
You
that.
never know.
Just,
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one to go out on.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Part 1, the B-52s. Tune in next week for Part 2, where we'll be ranking and discussing our favorite tracks. Follow us on Instagram and friend us on Facebook. Just search for GenXplainers. See you next time.